Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Pecora, back to read to you from our novel, Flora and Ulysses, The Illuminated Adventures by Kate D. Camillo. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we begin with Chapter 52. Is there a word for that? He sat in the window of Flora's room and looked down at the sleeping Flora, and then up and out at the lighted windows of the other houses. He thought about the words he would like to add to his poem. He thought about the music at Dr. Meacham's house, the way the voices sounded singing. He thought about the look on Mr. Claus's face when he went sailing backward down the hallway. Was there a word for that? Was there a word for all those things together? The lighted windows and the music and the terrified, disbelieving look on a cat's face when he was vanquished. The squirrel listened to the wind blowing through the leaves on the trees. I'm sorry, boys and girls. He closed his eyes and imagined a giant donut with sprinkles on top of it and cream inside of it. Or jelly, maybe. He thought about flying. He thought about the look on Flora's face when her mother said that life would be easier without her. What was the squirrel supposed to do with all these thoughts and feelings? Flora let out a small snore. Ulysses opened his eyes. He kept them open until the lights in the windows of the other houses went off one by one, and the world went dark except for a single streetlight at the end of the block. The streetlight fizzled into the darkness and then flared back to life, then fizzled again. Darkness, light, darkness, light. What, Ulysses wondered, does the streetlight want to say? He thought about William Spiver. He thought about the word banished and the word homesick. He imagined typing the words and watching them appear on the paper, letter by letter. Flora had told him before she went to sleep that she thought it would be a good idea if he didn't type anything for a while, at least not on her mother's typewriter. It seems to provoke her, she said. I think your typing poems and flying around the kitchen kind of made her have a nervous collapse, or something. She had said this, and then she had given him a sad look and closed the door to the bedroom. I closed the door as a reminder, okay? No typewriter, no typing. But what was a closed door to a superhero? You stupid little shepherdess. It was superhero time. Or something. Chapter 53. A sign. Flora was dreaming. She was sitting on the bank of a river. William Spiver was sitting beside her. The sun was shining, and a long way off there was a sign, a neon sign. There was a word on the sign, but Flora couldn't read it. What does the sign say? Flora asked. What sign? Said William Spiver. I'm temporarily blind. It was comforting to have William Spiver act just as annoying in a dream as he would in real life. Flora relaxed. She stared at the river. She had never seen anything so bright. If I were an explorer and I discovered this river, I would call it Incandesto, said Flora. Think of the universe as an accordion, said William Spiver. Flora felt a prick of irritation. What does that mean? She said. Can't you hear it? Asked William Spiver. He tilted his head to one side. He listened. Flora listened too. It sounded as if someone a long way off was playing a toy piano. Isn't it beautiful? Said William Spiver. It doesn't sound much like an accordion to me, said Flora. Oh, Flora Bell, said William Spiver. You're so cynical. Of course it's an accordion. The sign was closer. It had moved somehow. The neon letters were blinking on and off, spelling out the words, Welcome to Blundermetion. Wow, said Flora. What? Said William Spiver. I can read the sign. What does it say? Welcome to Blundermetion, said Flora. The piano music got louder. William Spiver took hold of her hand. They sat together on the banks of the Incandesto River, and Flora was perfectly happy. She thought, I don't feel homesick at all. She thought, William Spiver is holding my hand. And then she thought, I wonder where Ulysses is. 54. Dear Flora, he will defend the defenseless. He will protect the weak. He will write a poem. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the light above the stove. The squirrel was alone, but he had the strange feeling of not being alone. It was almost as if a cat were watching him. Had Mr. Claus tracked him down? Was he hiding in the shadows, waiting to exact his revenge? Cat revenge was a terrible thing. Cats never forgot an insult. Never. And to be thrown down a hallway backward by a squirrel was a terrible insult. Ulysses held himself very still. He put his nose up in the air and sniffed, but he didn't smell cat. He smelled smoke. Flora's mother stepped out of the shadows and into the muted light of the kitchen. "So," she said, "I see you helped yourself to my typewriter again. Put your little squirrel paws all over it." She took a step forward. She put the cigarette in her mouth and reached out with both hands and yanked the paper away from the typewriter. The rollers screamed in protest. Flora's mother crumpled the poem, without looking at it, without reading one word of it, and dropped the paper on the floor. "So," she said. She exhaled a ring of smoke, and the circle floated in the dim light of the kitchen, a beautiful, mysterious O. As he considered the cigarette smoke suspended in the air above him, Ulysses felt a wave of joy and sorrow, both things at once. He loved the world. He loved all of it. Smoke rings and lonely squids and giant donuts and Flora Belle Buckman's round head and all the wonderful thoughts inside it. He loved William Spiver and his expanding universe. He loved Mr. George Buckman and his hat and the way he looked when he laughed. He loved Dr. Measham and her watery eyes and her jelly sandwiches. He loved Tootie, who had called him a poet. He loved the stupid little shepherdess. He even loved Mr. Claus. He loved the world, this world, and he didn't want to leave. Flora's mother reached past him and picked up the blank piece of paper and rolled it into the typewriter. "You want to type?" she said. He nodded. He did want to type. He loved typing. "Okay, let's type. You're going to type what I say." But that went against the whole point of typing. Typing what someone else said. "Dear Flora," said Flora's mother. Ulysses shook his head. "Dear Flora," said Flora's mother again in a louder, more insistent voice. Ulysses looked up at her. Smoke exited her nostrils in two thin streams. "Do it," she said. Slowly, slowly, the squirrel typed the words, "Dear Flora." And then, stunned into a dumb willingness, he typed every terrible, untrue word that came out of Phyllis Buckman's mouth. The squirrel took dictation. Chapter 55, A Stone Squirrel. When he was finished, Flora's mother stood over his shoulder, reading and nodding and saying, that's right, that ought to do it. There are a few misspellings, but then you're a squirrel. Of course you're going to misspell things." She lit another cigarette and leaned against the kitchen table and considered him. "I guess it's time," she said. "Wait here. I'll be right back." And he did as she said. He waited. She left the kitchen, and he simply sat there unmoving. It was as if she had put a spell on him. It was as if typing the lies, the wrong words, had depleted him of all the ability to act. Once, long ago, in a garden in the springtime, Ulysses had seen a squirrel made of stone, gray, hollowed eyes, frozen. In his stone paws, he held a stone acorn that he would never get to consume. That squirrel was probably in the garden now, still holding that acorn, still waiting. "I am a stone squirrel," thought Ulysses. "I can't move." He looked over at the words he had typed. They were untrue words. Several of them were misspelled. There was no joy in them, no love. And worst of all, they were words that would hurt Flora. He turned slowly. He sniffed his tail. And as he sniffed, he remembered the words that Flora had shouted at him in the giant dew nut. "Remember who you are. You are Ulysses." This helpful advice had been followed by a single powerful word, act. He heard the sound of footsteps. What should he do? What action should he take? He should type. He should type a word. But what word? No more typing! Chapter 56, Kidnapped. She woke with a start. The house was incredibly dark, so dark that Flora wondered if she had gone temporarily blind. "Ulysses," she said. She sat up and stared in the direction of the door. Slowly the rectangular outline appeared, and then she could see it was ajar. "Ulysses," she said again. She got out of bed and went down the darkened stairs and past the little shepherdess. "You stupid lamp," she said. She made her way into the kitchen. It was empty. The typewriter was unmanned or unsquirreled. "Ulysses," said Flora. She walked over to the typewriter and saw a piece of paper glowing white in the dim light. "Uh-oh," she said. She leaned in close. She squinted. "Dear Flora, I am terribly fond of you, but I hear the call of the wild, and I must return to my natural habitat. Thank you for the macaroni and cheese. Yours, Mr. Squirrel." Mr. Squirrel? Call of the wild? Terribly fond? It was the biggest lie that Flora had ever read in her life. It didn't look like Ulysses had written it at all. Only at the very end did the truth appear. 2 letters, F and L. That was Ulysses, she knew, trying to type her name one last time, trying to tell her that he loved her. I love you too, she whispered to the paper. And then she looked around the kitchen. What kind of cynic was she whispering I love you to a squirrel who wasn't even there? But she did love him. She loved his whiskers. She loved his words. She loved his happiness, his little head, his determined heart, his nutty breath. She loved how beautiful he looked when he flew. She felt her heart seize up. Why hadn't she told him that? She should have said those words to him. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was finding him. Flora hadn't been reading The Criminal Element for 2 solid years for nothing. She knew what was going on. The squirrel had been kidnapped by her mother. She took a deep breath. She considered what to do, what action to take. In the event of a true and genuine emergency, an absolute and undeniable crime, the authorities must be notified immediately, said the criminal element. Flora was certain that this was a true and genuine emergency, an absolute and undeniable crime. Still, it didn't seem like a good idea to notify the authorities. If she called the police, what would she say? My mother kidnapped my squirrel? The criminal element! If for some reason the authorities are not accessible to you, then you must seek help in other quarters. Whom do you trust? Whom do you know to be a safe port in a storm? Flora suddenly remembered in her dream how warm William Spiver's hand had felt in her own. She blushed. Whom did she trust? Good grief! She trusted William Spiver. All right, boys and girls, we're going to stop there for today. Stay tuned to see what happens next in our novel. Have a great day.